This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. This episode of the show is sponsored by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists get funding, gain influence, and build strategic relationships with the stakeholders who matter most in their professional world. And reaching those goals often involves effective translation of complicated information into engaging, jargon-free communication that boils down complexities to capture the attention of decision makers and general audiences. If you're interested in getting a free resource to help you do that, go to complexitymadeclear.com to get your 11 keys for translating complexity. That's complexitymadeclear.com to get your free infographic that's used by science communicators at major organizations to boil down, but not dumb down, complicated science and technical topics for key stakeholders. I am so pleased to welcome Elaine Eisenman to the show today. Elaine is a seasoned independent board member, senior executive, educator, and advisor to high-growth companies, both public and private. She serves as a member of the board of directors of publicly traded Designer Brands Incorporated, which owns several well-known brands, including DSW, which is otherwise known as Designer Shoe Warehouse. Elaine is also a managing director of Sage Advisors, where she provides strategic advisory services to CEOs seeking to capitalize on new growth opportunities and drive large-scale transformation with a focus on alignment of people, purpose, and profitability. Elaine is president of the New England chapter of the Private Directors Association and has a long list of senior high-stakes executive roles, including Dean of Executive Education at Babson College, that you can check out on her LinkedIn profile, which will be included in the show notes for this episode. Elaine earned her Ph.D. in organizational psychology from New York University, where she was awarded the Fryer Award for Best Dissertation on Organizations, her master's from Columbia University in social and community psychiatry, and her bachelor's from Boston University. Welcome to the show, Elaine. It is so wonderful to have you here with us.
Thank you, Mark. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I'm entranced by the podcast series that you've created for science.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, this is going to be great because there's so much that you have done and so much expertise you've built up in all these different roles in your career journey so far that are just incredibly relevant for listeners. And I just want to start out more from a high level perspective, which is asking about entrepreneurship and organizational psychology, which is a common thread that runs throughout your career journey. What sparked that interest in those subjects for you?
I don't know that it was a specific spark, but my original slant in psychology was I was pursuing a doctorate in clinical psychology. And my main focus was working with dysfunctional families and helping them come to some agreement about how could they become more functional. At some point in my career, I started doing consulting to healthcare groups and discovered that I was absolutely intrigued by organizations and organizational dynamics. And so the background I had, I was all but dissertation in clinical around dysfunctional families, translated rather nicely to organizations and helping me understand the culture of organizations and what it took for strong leaders to be able to build those organizations. And as I became more and more involved after my doctorate in working in both large corporations and smaller, as both a consultant as an executive, my path of intrigue took me more towards the notion of independence and motivation, and which put together is really some of the starting points for many entrepreneurs is how do they build an organization that reflects their values and reflects their aspirations and bring people along the journey with them. So I think it all came together, not in a way that made a lot of sense in terms of my interest areas, but then really took fruit when I started looking at the nature of entrepreneurship, which is not necessarily about taking risks, but building cultures and building companies and providing ongoing value in communities and to people.
Just love it. And kind of jumping from that point, how you talked about it was a little bit of an evolution. It wasn't one particular moment. You know, you've had many fascinating transition points in your career journey. And a lot of times, you know, it can be very difficult to make those shifts. There's a lot going on, a lot of variables, a lot of uncertainty. And I wonder if you could share with listeners what lessons you learned from those transition points, the skills, maybe mindsets that were helpful in making successful transitions, and also landmines to be vigilant about and to avoid if possible.
Sure, I'd love to. I think what I'd like to do is first do a call out to my mother. And my mother, who unfortunately died in her early 70s, but would be 100 these days. She was unique in that she worked. When she died at the age of 70, she was chief financial officer for a real estate investment firm, which was unheard of for her era. I mean, think about that. That was 30 years ago. And the piece that I took away from her was that she always said she was lucky. She never gave herself credit for being competent. And she never really said, my company is lucky to have me. So she never really had a good sense of her value in the business world. She always viewed it as luck. As growing up, I always vowed that I hoped I had her luck, but more importantly, I always felt that I had to earn my way. And one way of earning my way is to always look for opportunity so that I would never feel stuck in one place. And while she didn't feel stuck, she was in a great place. She never, ever looked beyond the walls of the route she had chosen. So I think if there was anything that I would recommend for people looking at their careers, looking at their life challenges, looking at how to grow, it's never feel that you're there because of luck. Always have a really sound evaluation of the value you bring to all situations. Never, ever focus on one thing that will be it forever. Be as curious and opportunistic and vocal about possibilities as you possibly can be. And stay connected so that at any moment in time, and this has served me well through my entire career, you can pick up the phone to 10 people and say, I'm out of here, where am I going? And so there's a sense of always being able and always trusting and throwing it out to the universe, because the universe is that great collection of people that you meet along the way who will always help you answer the question of where's my next step? Because too often in careers and in jobs, people feel stuck or they feel uncomfortable. The culture doesn't fit, the values don't fit. I don't have the access that I thought I should have. This job isn't meeting my expectations. And people don't necessarily think about, how do I get out of here? They end up being more inwardly focused, called I'm miserable. So my experience has been never be miserable, just figure it out and move forward, but always be scanning to know where your next step is.
Yeah, that curiosity and opportunism, the opportunistic attitude that you underscore is so important. It's something that people tend to maybe shut off a bit once they're in a job.
Right, exactly. And people get busy. So you think, I can't call my friends, I can't call my networks. It's easy to just, even by sending emails, texts, following people on Instagram, social media that didn't occur in my career, beginning of my career, certainly. But there's so many ways of keeping in touch with people now that it's not, I don't have time to go out for coffee. I don't have time to go have a drink. I don't have time for lunch. The world is a possibility and you can connect with anyone at any time.
Mm-hmm. And, on this next topic, I want to ask you about life can be so unpredictable. You may be in a job and then there can be a reorganization the next day that you didn't expect, or a life change that is going to require you to move or something like that. You published a book in 2007 with co-authors called I Didn't See It Coming. in which you cover topics like managing the rank above you, the trouble with teams, the house of mirrors, or how to keep your perspective. Just reading the table of contents, I was so intrigued and hungry for more, to read more about it. And we'll have a link to the book, of course, in the show notes. It's a fascinating book, and it's really just as relevant today. And I would love for you to share with listeners the focus of the book, and perhaps 2 or 3 major takeaways from it, and anything else you think would be relevant for our audience today listening.
Absolutely. So the book was written with an eye towards helping people anticipate and prepare in advance for organizational politics or political hurdles that can get in the way of their career. But as we started to write the book and we interviewed people for the book, we realized that a lot of the book was about how do you think about risk? And are you willing to take risks in your career that will move you to the next place? Because we realize that too often people are afraid of risk because they're afraid that if they take the risk and fail, suddenly they will look bad, as opposed to if they take the risk and fail, somebody will say, wow, you were willing to take a risk, let's give you another risk. So what we discovered as we talked with people is what we ultimately identified as the 4 laws of corporate success. And I knew you were going to ask me this question, so I went back and said, are they as valid today in remote working as they were in in-person working? Because as you think about the notion of remote work, and I'll talk more about that later, it changes the stakes, but I don't think it changes the issues. And so our first law of corporate success is to understand that no matter what role you have, it's always about the money. And if you cannot demonstrate how your job and you allows the company to make money, to drive revenue, and to provide shareholder value, then you shouldn't be in that job. You will never succeed. You will never move ahead. So no matter what the role is, it's important to know that it's always about the money. And this is, in HR, people say, well, I'm in a service part of the organization. I'm not in the revenue producing. Yes, but in HR, you're involved in recruitment, you're involved in compensation, you're involved in policies, you're involved in procedures, you're involved in retention. All of those things drive revenue because they keep the right people in place. So it's really reassessing your job and ensuring that you can always speak to how you are helping the company drive revenue. The second law is get with the program. And this is incredibly important right now as companies more and more talk about values, corporate culture, purpose, and the like. If you're in a company where Monday morning, every Sunday night, when you anticipate Monday morning, you want to throw up because you can't stand the people you work with, or you feel that there are significant value violations that are going on, or you hate the culture, you have to get out of the company because you can't get with the program. The culture is the program. The values are the program. And either you understand how you fit in it and you can live with it, or you have to get out of there. The third rule is perception matters. Everything you do and say, people notice. And you can be misjudged because your actions do not speak your values, or your actions do not speak your intentions. People look at your behaviors through their own lens. And the challenge of that is, if you slam your hand on a table, people will say you're angry as opposed to you were killing a bug. So you have to be really clear when you speak up, when you take action, when you engage people in what you're doing, to be clear that they're clear, and understanding how you come across as opposed to always talking about other people. So getting input from colleagues, trusted colleagues, about how you present and how you show up, particularly if most of your day now is spent on Zoom, is critical to understand how you fit in that organization. And the last law is always have plan B. Always have plan B. It goes back to what I talked about in the beginning. Never believe you will be somewhere forever. And you need to always be thinking about what are other possibilities, whether it's interesting other roles in your company, or it's interesting other roles, or it's looking at expanding your roles or taking on outside volunteer work. It's always thinking about what's next, which doesn't mean you're being disloyal. It means that you're being loyal to yourself and your future.
Thanks for that, Elaine. Really important message. And, you have another book, which is so, so interesting to me as well. In 2019, you co-authored with Susan Stautberg a book called Betrayed, A Survivor's Guide to Lying, Cheating, and Double Dealing. How could you not want to read that book? Because you had 50 true stories, more than 50, of betrayal. And the purpose of this was to learn how to successfully handle the trauma, overcome the urge for quick revenge, and then consider possibilities for forgiveness. And as you point out, as most importantly, set a positive path for the future. Please tell us more about this book and any other lessons from the book that could help listeners.
How to count the ways. So what we really looked at in Betrayal was the recognition that this is a very difficult time for people, and it's very, very difficult to get past what people consider to be sort of other people getting in the way of what you think is right, or people who are, for lack of a better term, stabbing you in the back. And so to do that, my co-author and I, Susan, were talking one night over drinks, as all good things happen. And we talked about a number of people we knew who had been betrayed and had really been blindsided by this betrayal. So we thought it might be interesting to see if there was a book out there or what was going on out there that really talked about the notion of betrayal. And what we discovered is there weren't a lot of books for people who'd been betrayed and wanted to go beyond it. So we started off by interviewing people. We ultimately interviewed 50 people for the book. And we thought that there'd be different stories in each and different types of betrayal. And what we learned is there's only one type of betrayal. Betrayal is simply one person intentionally putting their needs and self-interest above that of others and dehumanizing the other to carry out their plan of betrayal. And so betrayal in that way is the shadow companion of trust, because you can't be betrayed by someone you don't trust. If you don't trust them, it's because you think they'll do something wrong. So you can't be betrayed because they'll fulfill what you think is true to be true about them. So it's always lurking below and behind the surface of trust. And so no matter how well you know somebody, and I hate to say this, you never fully know their moral compass when stressed. And that's the nature of betrayal. We discovered that there are three types of trust in our research. Blind trust, where you just trust somebody. I felt good about that person, I trust them. Or it's a spouse, or it's your best friend, or it's a family member. They'd never do anything to hurt me, but maybe they will. There's organizational trust, where you believe that your colleagues have the same goals as you and are not going to cut you off at the knees at any time because you all work together and it's a common culture. Also not always wise. And the last is wise trust, where it's trust, but verified.
Right.
Where you need to be somewhat vigilant and say, if anything's amiss, let me think about what this is. And so, which led us to the notion of who's trustworthy? How do you discover people being trustworthy? So trust must be earned. It's not just given. It's not a gift. You don't meet somebody and automatically trust them. It's in the response to consistent trustworthiness, where trustworthiness is competence, honesty, and reliability. Now, not everybody has all those three pieces of trustworthiness going at the same time. So, for example, I may trust my best friend with my life, but I won't trust her to mail a package for me on the day she promises to mail it, because she'll forget and it'll stay in the backseat of her car. So it's really figuring out who the people are who you can trust. And what we discovered is the core message for everybody who was betrayed is never give up your power. So if you're betrayed, do not back off and become overly vulnerable. Tell people you were betrayed. but control the narrative. Do not let the person who betrayed you control your story. So you need to take control the minute you're betrayed so that the betrayal doesn't go deeper. We also discovered that the notion of forgiveness does not mean what many people think it means. Forgiveness does not mean absolving a person of what they've done to you. Forgiveness has been described as a gift you give yourself, and that it's letting go of the anger, the rage, the grudge holding, the constant playing out in your mind what happened, and instead it's just letting it go and moving forward. So it's not absolving the person, it's letting go of the rage so that you can function again and move forward. And that forgiveness is a key to resilience, which is moving forward, putting it behind you, asking what you learned from the situation, taking those learnings with you and moving away. So that's kind of core. I could obviously spend 3 hours talking about this, but we interviewed people who had been professionally betrayed, personally betrayed, family businesses, boards of directors, CEOs of companies, siblings, which is a horrifying source of betrayal, parents and kids, really interesting stories. But these were core themes throughout all those interviews.
Wonderful, wonderful. And folks will be able to find the book in the show notes so that they can actually read all the details that you were just describing there, Elaine. Now, we're talking right now in the midst of the pandemic that's continuing here, COVID-19, and organizations are really in the midst of a whirlwind of simultaneous changes. The great resignation, people call it, to the still being written norms of work, the new norms here. And what recommendations do you have for listeners who are trying to navigate these shifting circumstances, either within an organization or outside as a job seeker, for example?
So part of what I'd recommend is really taking a step back and saying, how different is this really? That, your career aspirations probably have remained the same. Your goals have remained the same. Your values are the same. It's how do you apply it to new scenarios? It's not, I don't believe, and from the number of people I've talked to, I don't believe that the world has changed in a fundamental way that impacts your personal view. What it's impacted is how you go about things. So the how you go about things is the change to remote work. I was talking with somebody the other day who just started a new job, and she was saying one of the big problems in this new job, and she's a senior person, is that it's still on Zoom. The company is closed. It's all remote. Her colleagues, before meetings, don't go on and chat the way you would in a conference room. People don't, they'll sign in. So you see their whatever face they have for their Zoom account. And then the minute the meeting starts, everybody comes on board. So the question then becomes, how do you build those critical relationships that will serve you throughout your entire career if you don't meet anybody at a new job? So what are the strategies that you need to develop to be able to open up those doors to meeting other people beyond the Zoom conference room? Can you send a chat message to somebody and say, could we meet for Zoom coffee? Just so I could get to know you. I'm brand new here. Help me out, guys. Because those are new. So those are strategies, but they're not fundamental changes about the need to create work-related relationships, which take you forever to develop, but also serve you well throughout your entire career. So it's stepping back. It's also, people are reading about the Great Resignation and saying, well, wow, maybe I should leave. Well, my question would be why? Be very, very clear about your aspirations, be very, very clear about your goals, be very, very clear, most importantly, about your values and what you seek in a culture. And if those aren't a match for your current job, then start looking for what it is, but don't necessarily resign in advance of finding it. So it's doing the same things you did before, but you have the greater luxury of being able to step back and not have to go into an office every day that you hate. So what if you're on a Zoom meeting? You can live with it for the short term while you're looking elsewhere. Don't simply get caught up in the sort of herd mentality of the grass is always greener. So I think it's needing to take a step back and not recognize the changes, but see the changes as being more tactical than strategic, and you need to be strategic.
Such a great point. Such a great point. There is that knee-jerk reflex, talking about, well, everyone's doing it. So, I've been dissatisfied, so I should just resign. And asking yourself those questions, but finding opportunities to connect really fundamentally with people around you. And you already spoke at the beginning about developing and continuing to check in with your network while you're in the job anyway, sort of the greater universe, but applying those principles inside your organization, even if they're virtual, at least right for now. Really important for our listeners to hear that. Elaine, I feel so fortunate. Our listeners are so fortunate to have you on the show, particularly at this particular moment, because, thinking now about the future of work and your expertise in organizational psychology, and of course, the real world experience that you've had at the highest levels of public, private, and nonprofit organizations, as you look into your crystal ball and see the future unfolding, both for individual contributors, but also for leaders. What do you see as sort of the future of work, or over the horizon, as things might change for folks who are, in organizations, regardless of the sector?
I think that probably the most fundamental shift is the increased concern and discussions about the whole ESG focus, environmental, social, and governance, that culture, values, impact on the people around us, impact on the environment, and the criticality of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. I think it's here to stay now. The question becomes, how fast will it continue to grow? I think that, and so that's something that has never happened before. It's always been more niche, so you could find a few little companies that care about it. But now, I remember, even 10 years ago, saying to clients, people are asking about what your stance is on these things. People are looking at your website to see if you do any good in this world, or if you just are in it for the money and the profits. And it was important then, but there was a lot of eye rolling. Now people are taking it seriously because lenders are taking access to capital. Lenders are asking those questions. The stock market is asking those questions. Analysts are asking those questions. So suddenly it's a take. It's not a done deal, but it's a dialogue and a discussion that I think is open to people who are thinking of changing jobs in ways that have never been possible before. So I gain great satisfaction and delight in seeing that happen. I worry enormously about the impact of remote work on young people who are just coming out, and in their first job, they're sitting behind a Zoom screen and not building the kind of relationships that will help them throughout their career. They need to take action on their own, however it might, to create those relationships themselves and to be proactive about it. And I think leaders of organizations have to recognize that people need help, that you just can't run. I know so many people now who have taken new jobs and are told, we'll be fully remote forever. Well, I worry about those new employees, no matter what level they are at the organization. And if they're a leader, I really worry about them, because how are they going to build loyalty and culture in their teams? So all of those are up for play right now. I think it's stuff to be really, really aware of and to track, but I think it's too soon to say what the outcomes will be. Mm-hmm. And most importantly, organizations have to be resilient. The lessons of COVID are that companies that really focused on looking around corners and looking for things that they hadn't thought of before, and being able to mobilize small groups within the organization that they'd never mobilized before, were able to do things in 2 weeks that used to take 2 years, because it was 2 years of discussion as opposed to 2 weeks of necessity. So I think the speed to outcome is going to also be a significant play as long as companies continue to learn and understand what it means to be resilient.
Wonderful. Maybe we'll all gather around the water cooler in the metaverse.
Yes.
Elaine Eisenman, your insights, your wisdom, your experience, expertise from all these different angles, and your ability to communicate them so crisply is a joy to engage with you. And I know it's a gift for our listeners. So thank you for being here on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
And listeners, thank you so much for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.